Hello, hello, hello. I'm GT Angel, and I'm going to be bringing you a Dominions 5 multiplayer game of middle-aged Sceleria. So, we're going to start off with looking over the nation, taking a look, doing a national overview, taking a look at pretender design, and I'll try to make it not too long. So this was my first game of multiplayer Dominions. I had played single player a lot beforehand, but this is my first multiplayer game, so it was a noob game, so other people new to multiplayer. So I definitely learned a lot from this game. I definitely made mistakes, and I'll try to point those out and point out what I felt worked well, what didn't, and what I think you can do. So, Sceleria. The basic overview of Sceleria is that you summon lots of undead, and then you use that supported with mages to take over the world. Uh, so I'll get over how that works, but so first we'll take a look at the commanders. You've got your basic scout, so good to have a scout, just generally useful. You've got assassins. You can definitely do tricky stuff with assassins. I know you can do expansion with assassins. Uh, my understanding is that it's good against hard provinces like Heavy Cav and stuff like that, where you can just take out the commanders and then send in a scout to take it. It's not something I'm super comfortable with yet, so I don't do that. But you can definitely do that, and then you can definitely use them later to pick off mages, pick off random commanders. It's useful. Then we've got the Centurion. Centurion is your basic leader, carries troops around, can put them in line formation. 1 recruitment point. Everything you want. One thing I forgot to mention, this game was played with a sprite overhaul mod, so the unit sprites will look a little different if you play without a mod, but they're the same units, so yeah. Then you've got the Legatus Legionis, who is just a stronger basic commander. Has some reasonable items on him. Can carry more units, 4 squads. I don't generally get this guy very much, though, because after the early game, you're not going to be needing to carry around too many human or living troops. And 2 recruitment points is a lot to ask. You'll see later, but this nation really wants to use recruitment points for more valuable things. And in fact, this is often the more valuable thing. So it doesn't look like much, it's just a 45 gold, 1 recruitment point priest. But the thing is, this priest is a reanimator priest. It can summon undead, so that's just its action for the turn instead of moving or anything. And I'll go over what exactly you can summon, but the point is every time you recruit a priest, you get a steady supply of undead units for the rest of the game. So you can imagine also that this scales up. You recruit 1 priest, you get a steady supply, you recruit more, you get even more. Eventually you start pumping out armies constantly, just for free, essentially. Because these units are super cheap to make, they're sacred, and so they have cheap upkeep. They can carry around a few living units, not that well, and some undead units. But these guys are incredible. You recruit them 2 at a time, just need a temple, and undead for days. Then we've got your Recruit Anywhere Mage. This is your only Recruit Anywhere Mage, and luckily it's a good one. Astral one, so you can do communions, you can do mind burns. With enough items, you can teleport these guys if you want. And Death one. Death one's great. You can raise dead, you can do stuff like Shadow Blasts with communions, other death evocations. Because these guys can communion so well, they can also do the giant death stuff. Like, you can do Rigor Mortis trivially. You can pump up your communions with, like, invulnerability to protect if you want. These guys are also priests, and because you can communion up, you can very easily get smite spam or apostasy spam, which is a unique spell for this nation that I'll go over later. But the holy levels are really good for this. You also have a bunch of other holy spells that I'll go over that buff your undead, so the ability to Holy Communion is really strong. And then they have solid research, so good research mages. There also are reanimators priests too, so they can raise undead. There is usually you'll just go with cultists for that instead, because you get more undead for the same recruitment points and for less gold, with one exception that I'll go over. But generally these guys are just mages. They're great. Then we'll skip over the Censor for a moment and the Grand Thaumaturge. So this is your big cap-only mage, slow to recruit, expensive, and you get a base of Astral 2, Death 2, Holy 3, and then you get Air, Water, Astral, or Death as an extra path, and every once in a while you get another one of those. So these guys are great. They can naturally do all the Holy 3 stuff, so you can smite with these just natively. Astral 2 means they can very easily get up to teleport with 3. You can easily Mind Burn, Soul Slay, Enslave, Mind. Any other Astral spells. Stellar Cascade is another good one. Then Death 2, so they can Horde of Skeletons at the start. They can do all the other Death Evocation, Shadow Blast. Nether Darts is another good Shadow Evocation, or I guess it's an Astral Evocation that all your mages can do. You can easily power the spheres. Light of the Northern Star, Anti-Magic. So, all sorts of good stuff. And the air lets you do Winds of Death and Wailing Winds. And Fog Warriors. Thunderfend if you need to, stuff like that. Water lets you do stuff like Grip of Winter, Quagmire. You can even do smaller stuff like Frozen Heart later on. So you have lots of good options. And because every mage you make is a communion mage, you can very easily get high paths and whatever you want in battle. And if you're able to get any communion matrices, that also means that you can stick them on any independent mages you get. So all those random nature shamans that you find, stick a communion matrix on them, stick them in, and you can just do arbitrary nature. Anything else you find, you can keep doing. So it's great. And like before, they're also reanimator priests. These you have even less reason to use this for, but it is an option if you need it. They are old though, but they can naturally twice born themselves, which is often a good choice. Then the final commander, you've got the cap-only Censor. So this is a Sacred Commander. It has your pretty high undead leadership, so you can put them in line formation, I'm pretty sure. The big thing is this guy has a Lictor Axe, which is an anti-undead weapon. So this is a good option if you're against like Airmore, or someone who's spamming a bunch of undead against you. Generally, you're not going to get too many of these guys, just because they're competing with your cap-only Grand Thaumaturgs. And you are pretty constrained on magic diversity as this nation. You only have access to a little bit of, or a few mages that get air and water, and then you have Astral Death everywhere. So you really want a lot of Grand Thaumaturgs so you can have that that air and that water everywhere that you need it. So the big thing here is you always want to be doing stuff with your command points, or recruitment points. So Grand Thaumaturgs are great, so your capital is going to be pumping those out non-stop after a while. And then you just want to keep getting mages and cultists all over the place. So it's hard to justify stopping that, but every once in a while you'll need to. And the cultists are the big reason why after the early game you can generally stop recruiting mundane troops. You can just raise skeletons. And I'll go over the implications of that in a moment, but first let's take a look at your actual mundane units. So you've got slingers. Slingers are not great, but they are a ranged option. You can easily fit a few of these into a squad just to get some extra damage or annoy someone. They could probably be good against like barbarians and tribes, I'm guessing, because they're low protection. The enemies are low protection. But You can also just forget about these guys if you want. It's not a big deal. Then you've got the 2 gladiators. So these will only fight for a single battle, essentially. They leave if they take damage or if they hit someone. So you can keep them in the back and sometimes keep them around, but generally these are one-time use units. You've got the net trident version, and you've got the flail version, and they're really, really good units. And they take basically no resources and very few recruitment points. So the point of these units is, early on you can mix them in with your expansion, use them to take out harder provinces, or just to reduce your attrition, because you can fit them in easily. You're going to be resource constrained a lot. So anytime you have, say, an extra 100 gold and 10 resources, you can just grab 10 of these. And instead of losing a couple units in a fight, you can keep them all. These are also really good for dealing with enemies that are rushing you. You can spam these out really fast and just take out armies with them. It's very difficult to be cost effective against these. But obviously they're not going to make out the bulk of your army most of the time because they are one-time use. But they're very useful. Like, you'll end up getting these most of the time just to help with expansion. But then your regular troops, the ones that will make up the bulk of your army. You've got the Velites. They are general Roman troops. Got basic stats all around. Reasonably low protection, but they do have a shield, so they're good against arrows. And importantly, they have a javelin, so you can set them to fire. Sometimes you'll want to set a small squad up front to attack and then the rest to fire. But that lets you get a bit of an alpha strike and reduces attrition a lot by just killing enemies first or weakening them, and then you clear them up faster before they can finish you off. They are skirmishers, which you can use to deal with arrows even better. And these guys are great. 10 resources, so you are going to be resource constrained a lot. So these guys are often going to be what you fill your army up with. But when you do have some more resources, you've got the Ally Legionnaire, which is just a better Velite, basically. It takes twice as many resources, but it's just as much gold, just as much recruitment points, so you just get a better unit. Protection is twice as much. You do lose a defense skill, but otherwise I think you're the same. You might do more damage. Nope, 3, 10, 13. Yeah, no, same damage, but just get more protection. Then if you spend a little bit more, you can get the Hestatus, which is just even a little better. So these do more damage. You do get a sword instead of a spear, so you are a slightly shorter weapon. So if you're dealing with repel, this might be worse, but otherwise you just do more damage. So these guys are pretty worth it too. You can easily just mix in a mix of the Ally Legionnaires and Hestatus. And then Velites to fill out the rest of your army. Then you've got the Princip. So if you want to spend even more, you can get these guys. They just have a bit higher attack and defense skill, I think. But they are a lot more expensive in gold, recruitment points. But you can easily put some of these in, especially if you want to put them in like your front line to just be the front line that protects the rest of your army. So the rest of your army does javelins at first, then comes in and doesn't take the full brunt, while as your higher defense skill units get to block a little bit. Then you've also got the Triarius. So these are old units, which is a bit of a downside, but you get formation fighter length 4 spears. So if you want some elite squad to put in front or something, or even right behind the front line to come in and just have really high attack density. You don't have the javelins though, so you do want these near the front, but just more variants. Then you've got Praetorian Guard, who are also old, but elite troops cost more, but they do have bodyguard. So they're probably mostly useful for the bodyguard function. So if you're dealing with assassins, you can easily just put a few of these guys on and they're most likely going to show up and help. Otherwise, they're probably too expensive most of the time. But you could probably justify fitting some of these in if you wanted. Then finally, you've got the standard. It's basically a Velite, I think. Maybe Ally. Or maybe a status. Yeah, I think it's basically a status that has a morale boosting standard. So these are good to just mix a couple in just to get that morale boost. Make sure your units don't rout. Let them fight a little longer. Then we've got your Sacreds. So you've got your Sacred Lictor, cap only. Like the Sensor Commander, it has an anti-undead weapon, so that's its function. Otherwise, it is not special. It just has a... It also is magic weapon, so... Basically, you get these guys if you need anti-undead or magic weapons. Otherwise, they're not doing anything too special to make up for the fact that they cost like over twice as much as your other troops. But it is a very useful tool in your arsenal. They also patrol well. Then you've got the Shadow Vestal. So this is an undead sacred unit that you have. Also has magic weapon. It is stealthy, so you can do some tricky stuff with that. And it is ethereal, so against mundane weapons, it's going to be reasonably okay. But it's a lot more expensive than your other troops. It doesn't have any protection. Its hit points aren't that great. So it's not really doing anything too special. I'm sorry, I thought I heard something from on. But these units, they're not really worth the bless, neither is the Lictor too much. So you're going to recruit these maybe early on, maybe for a specific purpose if you want to like sneak in some stuff. But otherwise, you're probably not going to get these too much. And you're not going to make a bless for these units. But you are going to want a bless for your mages. Because all your mages are sacred. So getting something for that is very useful. So that's the mundane troops. But now I want to go over real quick the undead units. So the way this works is when you have a priest, you can have them reanimate ghouls, soulless, or long dead. Ghouls require sacrificing population, soulless require having corpses in the area, and long dead don't require anything. You can do them whenever. If you take one of your mages, you can also reanimate long dead horsemen. Usually this isn't really worth it because your mages would rather be out doing stuff or just researching. But there is an item you can get at construction for that increases the amount of undead that you raise. So you could, in theory, use that and get a bunch of long dead horsemen pretty cheaply. I think that item is... Yeah, the Amulet of the Dead. So you would get 3 long dead horsemen per mage and 5 death gem. So you could definitely use that to get a small squad of that. Like if you made 3 of these and spent like 3 turns, you'd get, I think, 3, 6, 9. So you'd get 27 of them. So 27 of them over 3 turns is not bad. And you could keep doing that for the rest of the game. And you also just get higher numbers of the other stuff. More ghouls, more soulless, more long dead. But you do get a higher number from 2 cultists. And then you get even larger numbers from the Grand Thaumaturgs. So as for what these units do... So I'll find the... I guess I don't have this fully set up. So ghouls. Ghouls require sacrificing the population, so you don't really want to use these. But they have 2 really important features that make them valuable. The first is that they are not mindless. You'll find all the other undead are mindless. These ones are not. That means that they can get hit by stuff like mind blasts, by mind burns, by soul slays. And that's really good because if they aren't getting hit by those things, your mages are, and that's really bad. It's very easy to run into a fight with just a couple mages with a bunch of undead units, and the enemy soul slays twice or mind burns a few times, and all of your undead have no leaders and don't do anything, and you lose the fight. So you really want some of these. These also have siege defense. The other skeletons and undead you'll find don't, basically. They have 0.1, I think, all of them. So these units can defend a fort. So if you're worried about that, you can get a bunch of these in vulnerable locations, put them in the forts, and it'll just delay your opponents a lot. Then you've also got the soulless. So these ones require corpses in the area, so you can't always make them. They are undisciplined, mindless, really slow. But they can't, like every undead other than the ghouls, they are poor amphibians, so they can go underwater. So these units, and they also do have siege strength. They have good siege strength. Bad siege defense, though. So these are there when you need the most chaff the fastest and don't care about quality. Not that your other undead is that quality, but these are not good. Or if you just want a bunch of siege strength. Like you can grab like a bunch of these from some corpses and then walk them onto a fort and use it to pop it in a turn or two. There is also another variant of the soulless you can get that actually has a shield and a bit of armor. But otherwise they're pretty similar. As for the Long Dead, they come in two main variants. You've got the Long Dead with armor. They are a little bit slower combat speed, 18 map move, and mediocre stats over the board, but they're fine. I mean, 5 hit points is low, but you have a bit of protection. You have like reasonable strength, attacks, defense, reasonable damage. So these units are bad, but they're not worthless, and you get a lot of them. And you can just do this all game. Like your other undead, they have siege strength, not so much siege defense. So you pump out a couple hundred of these, walk them over to a fort, it'll pop pretty quick. And it doesn't really matter that much if a lot of them die in the process because you got them for free. They just came out of the ground. There are a few variants of this, whether you have the same like shield and armor, shield, armor, and sword instead of spear, whether you have a hat, but they're all basically the same. If you see like a brown sprite, usually that means they have armor. Slightly different, but they're all basically the same. Then you have the unarmored variants, so just skeletons. They are map move 20, which can be relevant. Sometimes your armorless skeletons will be able to make it somewhere, and your armored ones won't. This also means that they have a little bit higher combat speeds. You can, if you're going to use some skeletons to try to slip into the back, you want to use these ones generally. This does mean that they have no protection. They will die very easily. And like the other Long Dead, their stats are bad or mediocre. But the point of the Long Dead and the Undead in general is not to be good units. The point is that you spend 3 turns making cultists, which gives you 6 of them, and suddenly you're making 18 of them a turn. And you do that again, and you're making 36 of them a turn? No, 36 of them a turn. Just for every turn, forever. So you just get some forts set up with these units, and you just get armies constant. And so the way you end up playing as Sceleria a lot of the time is you want more forts than other nations, because every fort is a skeleton spawner, essentially. You get a fort up, you put a temple on it, you start just spamming out cultists. This is an army that is just going to constantly be made. So instead of building troops, you just build more forts. Because forts essentially translate into troops, even if you don't, like, and they don't take money like other factions would. So while another faction might say I have 3 forts and be like, oh, well, I can keep up with mage and troop protection from these, Sceleria says, well, I made mages and no units, so I might as well make another 2 forts. And once you do that, you might as well keep making more forts. And it makes you get really strong as the game goes on, because you get all this free chaff, and you get more mages because you get to build more forts. Because your units don't cost upkeep, don't cost money. You're just getting cultists. The last undead that I didn't mention yet is the Long Dead Horsemen. So they are map move 23, combat speed 25, so these are actually fast units. They have 2 attacks. So solid attack density, you'll get 4 attacks per square with 2 of them. Stats kind of middle of the road all around. They'll die pretty easily, but they have shields, they have hats. So these are solid, and you can especially use them if the enemy doesn't have as many units. You can easily use these to slip around the back, get at mages, get at support units, get at commanders. And like your other units, they are port amphibians. All the Long Dead are, all the Soulless are, I believe. Yeah, so you have a very easy time getting underwater because you only need water access for your commanders. You don't need to get water breathing items most of the time. You will need water breathing if you want to take ghouls underwater, but otherwise you're good. You can even summon Mound Fiends to lead your undead if you want, and use those to carry your undead underwater. So you can even go underwater with very little investment overall, just a few death gems for the commander. So that's the undead. The other important thing to point out is that you have unique holy spells. So you have Undead Protection, Unholy Protection 1, 2, and 3. This is just different sizes of protection. Sorry, different sizes of magic resistance for your undead. It culminates in Protection of the Sepulchre, which affects the whole battlefield, but is MR negates easily, so it won't hit all of your units. So often you want to use this a few times, and you definitely want to use this before anti-magic if you're using that. But MR, so it protects against banishment, protects against spells. Very useful. Then you've got Unholy Power, which gives extra speed and attack skill to undead units. You've got the 1 AoE version. You've got the Holy 3/5 AoE version. And then you've got the 4 Holy whole battlefield version. So this is one of the reasons you want to do Holy Communions. Get 4 slaves, and your regular thaumaturgs can cast Power of the Sepulchre. 2 slaves, and your grand thaumaturgs can. And now all your undead are slightly better. They're faster. You've also got Unholy Command to steal undead units, so good if you're fighting like Airmore or other undead factions. You've got Unholy Blessing, lets you bless undead units. Good if you have, say, white mages. Also good if you're going to use the sacreds, but you're not going to do that too often. You've got different variants of the Unholy Blessing too. You've got small AoE, medium AoE, and battlefield. And then finally you have Apostasy. So it's a 50 range, perfect precision spell that charms an enemy sacred or priest. It is MR negates easily, so it won't work most of the time, but you can very easily grab a bunch of mages, put them in a communion, and if someone's running at you with a bunch of sacred units or something that don't have incredible magic resist, you just put a bunch of undead and a bunch of gladiators in front of them or something like that, start spamming Apostasy, and you can just come out ahead very easily. It's also good against anything that you're outnumbering. This is good against because it's just a way to turn a victory into an even better victory. So this is a big reason why you're strong enough early that you are hard to rush. And then obviously you can use Holy Communions to do your smites and stuff. So that is the undead units. So the overall view of the nation is you start out with regular Roman units. Your expansion's pretty solid with these, honestly. Your units are solid. The gladiators help fill in any holes, deal with any large, scary provinces. You can use assassins if you're comfortable with that. And then as the game goes on, you just spam forts and spam cultists, and you get unending hordes of undead units. They're really bad undead units, but support them with Wailing Winds, Rigor Mortis, Grip of Winter. If you can manage to find it, you can do stuff like Heat from Hell. You can do Foul Vapors, Anti-Magic. Eventually, later on, you can do stuff like Army of Gold, Army of Lead, Fog Warriors, Mass Flight. Early on, you can also use lots of Evocation, Shadow Blast, Nether Darts. So the idea is that you're going to have huge amounts of chaff all the time. You don't need to recruit units, so you can focus entirely on just your mages winning the battle, or making your units not as bad as they are and making them able to win. But your mages are the big thing that you use. So the way you end up playing a lot is you raid with groups of your undead, and then in big battles, you're relying on your mages to do big battlefield enchantments with your communions to take over, and just your chaff is either getting buffed like crazy or just getting in the way. And it just makes the battle take long enough that you win other ways. So you're very strong. You are limited in your magic diversity, so you want to fix that a little bit with your Pretender if you can. But you can do a lot with the magic you have. So speaking of Pretender, though, gonna talk about stuff that's good. So you definitely want to have good scales. Like, you don't need to be perfect, but you're a nation that gets out of hand very easily with forts, so you want as many forts as you can. Your troops are good enough to expand on their own. You don't really have that many... Like, you have Sacred Mages, so you do want a bit of a bless for them if you can, but you don't need to put a big bless onto Sacred Troops. So scales are really good for you. And you do well late game anyway. And then going a spread out magic path lets you fix up a lot of your diversity holes. So something like Divine Emperor is really good because you get Dominion 2, and it's essentially a rainbow chassis that you just get a higher Dominion to start with. You could use another one if you want. Like, you could probably go Frostfather or any of these. I would probably try to avoid doing an immobile just because you're going to want to have access to spells from your mate. Like, you're going to want spells, you're going to want sight searching. You want someone that can come in and do fights. And you definitely want magic paths if you can. But good options. Getting a bit of Astral and a bit of Death is really good. Astral gives you access to Arcane Finesse. So I ended up taking Farcaster in my game, because I figured mages having longer spells is really good. I think it's much better to go Arcane Finesse. You have so many MR negate spells that you really just want to penetrate magic resistance. All of your Shadow evocations, all of your Astral evocations and Mind Burns and stuff, all of your Holy Smites and Apostasies, all of that's MR negates. So you definitely want Arcane Finesse. And then for Death, you really, really want Undead Command. With your base nation, your methods of carrying around your groups of undead, your cultists can carry around 25, your Thaumaturg's 60, your Grand Thaumaturg's 105, Censor's 80. None of the others can. This is not sufficient. If you don't have Undead Command, you're going to end up summoning lots of Mound Fiends to carry them around. You're going to end up taking huge chunks of mages or cultists out of summoning to carry around your skeletons. You really, really want just to carry around lots of skeletons. So just grabbing 4 Undead Command is great. You'd probably go 3 if you wanted to, and you wanted like this. But this is a good base. I would definitely recommend going for Earth. You definitely want to guarantee you have Earth access. Army of Lead, Army of Gold, Weapons of Sharpness. These are all really important later on in the game they let your skeletons continue to be units. So late game, your enemies will have stuff like thugs that just have a bunch of protection. They'll have ways to just kill units really easily, lots of high damage spells, evocation, stuff like that. You want your skeletons to not be completely worthless, and earth magic gets you there. So late in the game, Army of Gold and Lead, or even just earlier doing stuff like a lot of Marble Warriors could work, where your units actually survive stuff. They have resistance to fire or some magic resist. And then Weapons of Sharpness lets them actually deal damage to high protection things. So you definitely want Earth. So this also, Earth also with Astral lets you get Communion Matrices natively, which is very useful. So I would recommend making sure that you get enough Earth to do Troll King's Court. So for a mage that has a boot slot, you can just do Earth 2 at the minimum. For anyone else, you need at least Earth 3. As for the Earth Blast, you could easily go Reinvigoration. You probably aren't going to go Mountain Survival, Reconstruction, Strength of Earth, Unbreakable, because your Sacred units are either going to be with other units, or they're not going to be getting hit as much. You could Fire Shock Resistance is another good one. You could even go... You could go Hard Skin or Fortitude, but it's probably not worth it. Other paths... Oh. So Fire, you can get Fire Resistance. Probably don't care about Morale or Wasteland Survival. Probably don't care about most of this other stuff, but the Fire Resistance is good. Same with Air. There's the Shock Resistance, Air Shield. Probably not important, but yeah, you could do Precision if you wanted. Cold, same thing. Cold Resistance. You could do like Winter's Gift if you want to move units around a little easier. Winter's Gift also, notably going for a little bit of cold, can mean that you can Grip of Winter more strongly in your Dominion. That is a spell that is very useful and you can natively get. Other things that are good, it is very good to get Poison Resist. You don't want Foul Vapor. Foul Vapors won't hit any of your undead troops, but it does hit your living mages, so could easily pick that up. It's also very useful to have a Nature 2 as your Pretender. That way you can craft... I forget what it's called. It's like it's the Nature Booster that gives you a +1 for 2. So you need a Nature 2 to make it. That's good for natively getting all of your tribe shamans up to Nature 2. Lets you harvest specs, let you actually use them for stuff. Just kind of convenient. Blood. So Blood's mostly, it's nice to have an access point to Blood. Because you're often going to scale into the late game, you can easily spend a few turns making like scouts or something, blood hunt with them, get into that, start empowering up. Having a Pretender that has some blood means that you could find blood sites, you can do a bit of blood hunting with your Pretender if you want. And I mean, you can get health, so it's a fine path to have. There are also a few blood items. Like there's a blood earth booster, I believe. Might be a blood death one, I'm not sure offhand. But generally, I would say what I would look to have is at least Astral, Death, Earth. Nature's great. I would try to have Nature. Anything else, kind of just what you want. You don't have any fire natively, so getting some fire is good. You do have some air and some water, so you can do that natively. Blood's also nice to have. As for scales, your Dominion isn't too important, so just something good enough. You prefer to have productivity, but you do like order, so bit of a mix. Obviously, you don't want heat or cold. You probably want to go cold over heat. You like being able to go over rivers. Your units are already cold resistant, I believe, or undead. And you have Grip of Winter natural access, which is a very useful spell for you, and that's better in cold climate. You definitely want magic. You definitely want growth. Like, you want as much magic as you can afford, because you're going to be using your mages a lot to win strong fights, so that extra fatigue reduction is very useful. And you're doing, like, medium-sized mages for your research, so Drain would hurt you really bad, but magic helps you a lot. And definitely Imprisoned, you don't need this to help you survive, you don't need it to help you expand, and you really benefit from the scales and like the magic access. The Pretender I actually used was based on, and a lot of this knowledge about the Pretender is based on Lucid Tactics playthrough of this nation. So this is the one that I ended up actually using. So Fire 1, Earth 5, Astral 4, Death 4, Nature 3, Blood 3. So scales are pretty good. You've got lots of magic. Like I mentioned before, I did Farcaster. I think Arcane Finesse is the better choice. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of resistances to keep your mages alive. So you can survive Foul Vapors early later on once people are trying to do, like, I forget what it's called, like the Fire Battlefield spell or Wrathful Skies. You can have some resistance. So this is good. You could easily try to sacrifice, like, the blood, like get a 4th point in nature or something, and get better scales. You could easily try to sack a scale a little bit to get, like, more fire or something. But something like this works good. Divine Emperor is often going to be good just because you get that extra Dominion point for free, and it is a rainbow chassis. But any of the rainbows are probably fine. So yeah, that is Sceleria. Next time, I will be back with the first look at the game, and I hope you enjoy.